Erwin Rommel was a military legend, the one general whose genius was admired by his own troops and his enemies alike. But what was his relationship with the man who gave him his power, Adolf Hitler? Initially one of Hitler's favorite generals, Rommel's brilliance and independence would eventually set them on a collision course. This is the story of how a battlefield prodigy, fueled by Hitler's favor, became the one commander the Führer couldn't control. In the blistering deserts of North Africa, a new kind of war was unfolding, and Erwin Rommel was writing the rulebook. He saw the vast, empty desert not as a barrier, but as a chessboard where speed and surprise were his queen and king. While his Allied opponents often had more men and machines, Rommel seemed to command the battlefield itself. He treated armored warfare like a naval battle on an ocean of sand, where mobility was everything. But his genius wasn't just about grand strategy, it was about deadly innovation. Facing superior British tank forces, Rommel did the unthinkable, he held his own panzers back. Instead, he dangled them as bait, luring Allied armor into deadly traps. He turned his 88mm anti-aircraft guns, designed to shoot at planes, into one of the most feared anti-tank weapons of the war. He was a predator, sending guns after tanks and bleeding his enemies without risking a head-on fight. Rommel also led from the very front, a ghost in the swirling sand whose presence alone could rally his men and demoralize his foes. It was this mix of tactical brilliance and fearless leadership that created the legend of the Desert Fox. Rommel's rapid rise was no accident, it was turbocharged by the admiration of Adolf Hitler. The two connected in the 1930s, with Hitler seeing his own ideals of boldness and action reflected in the ambitious officer. This favoritism fast-tracked Rommel's career, placing him in command of Hitler's personal bodyguard and later unleashing him on France and North Africa. Rommel, for his part, was initially impressed, describing Hitler as extraordinarily friendly and thriving on the trust placed in him. While not a member of the Nazi Party, he was a loyal soldier who supported the regime, believing Germany had been wronged after World War I. But this mutual admiration was a double-edged sword. As the war turned against Germany, Rommel the battlefield pragmatist began to clash with Hitler the fanatical ideologue. Rommel pleaded for strategic retreats at El Alamein and later in Normandy, arguing it was the only way to save his armies. He was met with furious no-retreat orders from a Führer who was increasingly detached from reality. The very independence and boldness that Hitler once admired in Rommel now made him seem dangerous and defeatist. Rommel began to see a leader whose stubbornness was leading Germany to ruin, and their relationship started to crack under the strain. By 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, Rommel was privately convinced the war was lost. His loyalty, once sworn to Hitler, began to shift toward saving Germany from total destruction. He was approached by a circle of high-ranking officers who believed the only way to save the nation was to remove Hitler from power. These resistance figures saw Rommel, a genuine national hero, as the one man who could lend legitimacy to their coup. His actual involvement, however, is still one of history's great debates. He agreed that Hitler must be removed from power, but he argued against assassination, fearing it would create a martyr and spark a civil war. Instead, he favored arresting Hitler and putting him on public trial. On July 15, just 5 days before the famous bomb plot, Rommel sent a blunt ultimatum to Hitler, urging him to face reality and make peace. It was too late. On July 20, the plot, known as Operation Valkyrie, failed. In the brutal investigation that followed, confessions extracted under torture implicated Rommel. The end came swiftly and brutally. While recovering from injuries sustained in an Allied air attack, Rommel was at home on October 14, 1944, when two of Hitler's generals paid him a visit. They brought an ultimatum, a cyanide capsule for a quiet suicide and a state funeral, or a humiliating show trial that would endanger his family. To protect them, Rommel chose the poison. Hitler then lied to the German people, announcing that their great field marshal had died of his wounds, preserving the myth of his loyal commander to the very end. So what made Rommel so dangerous to Hitler? It was the central paradox of his career. He was a product of Hitler's favor, a military star whose victories were used as propaganda for the Third Reich. But that same battlefield brilliance gave him the clarity to see the catastrophe Hitler was creating and the independence to question him. He was the one general who was both indispensable and uncontrollable, a legend created by the regime who, in the end, was destroyed.